Howdy, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to Dangerous Thoughts on Unsafe Space. I'm Carter Laren. I'll be your tour guide for the spectacular and entertaining crumbling of Western civilization. Someone in chat is asking who the chiseled shirtless guy is. It's either Socrates or Aristotle. I don't remember. I don't remember what image is up. Anyway, I'm kind of tired of talking about the Ukraine-Russia thing, but it is the number one topic in the news right now. So we're going to use it as a jumping off point to talk about some philosophy today. And we've got 4 segments today that we're going to go through. The first one is there is no we, and that will feature an atheist Bible reading by yours truly. The second feature we'll do, the second segment will be called Hey, Remember That Time We Almost Died? The third one we'll do a little interlude for hypocrisy, because that's always fun. And finally, we will talk about dichotomous thinking dystopia. Welcome to the dichotomous thinking dystopia. I was going to make little signs for these, but I didn't. Anyway, first, before we do all that stuff, look, we've got a lot of, if you're new to Unsafe Space, welcome. We've got a lot of different shows here, different series that we do. One is called 451 Degrees. That's mostly about censorship. We have a Great Reset series. We have a Kofefi Break series. We're going to launch Rebel Civics and some other ones. And this series that you're watching now is called Dangerous Thoughts. It's live every Wednesday. We might not always do live, but it's been live, and we continue to be doing live. It's live every Wednesday at whatever time this is, 5 p.m. Pacific time. I did joke about being the tour guide for the crumbling of Western civilization, but actually what we're trying to do on this show is help to build an intellectual arc here to preserve and defend and promote the crucial life-affirming, beautiful ideas responsible for the West's success. See that I made a biblical reference already with my arc. This show is not really for normies. If you have ADD, you'll probably have some trouble here. Your NPC programming will halt and catch fire. But if you're looking for some intellectual ammunition to fight the culture war and some occasional intellectual sparring, you are in the right place. That's what we do here. So on Dangerous Thoughts, we practice thinking more deeply so we can better understand, articulate, apply, and promulgate the ideas that help humans to flourish and thrive here in reality. Before we start, a couple of reminders. Don't forget to go to if you're on YouTube or wherever you are, don't forget to go to the subscribe button wherever you are. Please also head over to unsafespace.com. You can watch all the shows there. There's never any censorships. Even if we get canceled, we won't cancel ourselves from our own website. You can also support us financially at unsafespace.com. We live off of donations. That's how we survive. If you do support us financially, you get access to the community Discord where you can yell at me directly. You get your name in the credits. Depending on your level of contribution, get a weird grenade mug, which we're going to run out of soon. But I think that's all of the housekeeping I need to do. Welcome people in chat. All right. There is no we. Let's do an atheist reads the Bible. This is a great way to offend everyone. Fear not, my atheist friends. I haven't abandoned reason for faith at all. I'm also reading Aristophanes at the moment, but I'm not worshiping Dionysus. So, this is a real live Bible. And I'm going to read. I'm going to read a story. I'm going to read the parable of the Good Samaritan. Can't believe I'm reading the Bible. All right, where is it now? I got to find it. I just had it. All right. For those of you who are not familiar with this book, the address of this is Luke chapter 10, verse, 30. So what's happening is this lawyer dude is, Jesus is telling him to be nice to his neighbor, and this lawyer dude's like, hey, well, who's my neighbor? Because he just, he's trying to justify his own not niceness. All right. So then Jesus answered him and said, a certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves, who stripped him of his clothing, wounded him, and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance, a certain priest came down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Likewise, a Levite, when he arrived at the place, came and looked and passed by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion on him, and went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine, and he set him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. On the next day, when he departed, he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said to him, take care of him, and whatever more you spend when I come again, I will repay you. So which of these 3 do you think was neighbor to him who fell among the thieves? And the lawyer dude says, he who showed mercy on him. And Jesus says, go and do likewise. Okay. I think I probably broke some kind of oath I made by opening the Bible, but that's over and done with. Give you some context here. The Jews considered the Samaritans half-breed heretics. They were horrible mongrels. They had corrupted and defiled the Jewish religion. They were more repugnant than Gentiles. They were horrible. How does this relate to Ukraine? Because I said we're going to use Ukraine as a launching point for discussion today. Well, we're all hearing stories right now. A certain country has, let's call it, fallen among thieves who stripped that country of its clothing and wounded it. And we are being told that we must act. And we're being told that in moral language. We must be the good Samaritan. We must rush and save Ukraine from an evil aggressor. We have to save, I've heard this a lot, we have to save democracy from dictatorship. And not only are we being told we have to dress wounds and take care, but we have to actually get into a fight with the thieves on Ukraine's behalf, or we should be. Someone said everybody wants Ukraine as a launching point. Yeah, that was a poor choice of words, I guess, but that's what the battle's over. Ukraine as a launching point, I guess. Anyway, I don't want to get into the weeds on Ukraine because this show is about philosophy, not about, geopolitics. So let's put aside right now the validity of the mainstream narrative. Let's just accept it, actually. And we'll get into later in the show, as I mentioned, we'll get into some dichotomous thinking. But for now, let's assume that the mainstream narrative is 100% correct. Putin is 100% bad, evil, rotten to the core. He was not provoked in any way. Everyone has been an angel and a saint to him, and his behavior is purely tyrannical and imperialistic. And let's assume that Zelensky and Ukraine are 100% good. They are perfect defenders of individual rights. They are the ideal beacon of Western civilization. Let's also assume that the rest of NATO, including the United States, is 100% good. They acted with complete benevolence towards Russia for the past 30 years. They never tried to leverage Ukraine to undermine Russian interests. They've been perfect defenders of individual rights. I know all this is fantasy world, but let's just accept that crazy narrative a little bit. And I know that, people can argue there's nuance here correctly, but let's put all those objectives aside. Let's steelman the narrative for now and say, okay, that's the situation. So you want to be the good Samaritan. You believe that's the situation because you watch CNN, and you want to be the good Samaritan. You want to demonstrate your compassion, your benevolence, your righteousness. You want Jesus to tell parables about you that atheists will read 2,000 years later. So what do you do? What do you do? Do you, there's options, right? There's lots of options. Think about maybe what the Good Samaritan would do, right? Do you put a Ukraine flag in your Twitter profile like Kathy Young? Because that's helpful. right? Maybe you could share articles that compare Zelensky to George Washington because they're the same. Or if you really want to do something effective, you could retweet Clint Watt's call to have NATO's Air Force bomb Russian troops. By the way, ironically, his Twitter handle is named Selected Wisdom. I guess it's very, very selected. Dubious wisdom. But you could say, hey, why don't we bomb the Russians? That's what a good Samaritan would do, right? Because you have to show that you're good. You're on the side of good. So what would the good Samaritan do? Let's remind ourselves of what he did actually do in the story. He stopped. He was probably on his way somewhere important. I mean, people didn't go on vacation a lot there back then, I don't think. So he's, probably going somewhere important. He spent his own time and his own energy dressing wounds. He paid the hospital bill out of his own pocket and took care of this person. So based on that, what would he do if he believed the mainstream narrative and wanted to be good by these standards? He wanted to be the same level of goodness. Well, would he might maybe send money. He might send a truck of Starlink equipment like Elon Musk did, right? He might even take up arms and go to Ukraine himself to help, I guess, if you're going to throw in fighting the thieves as part of his nobility, right? And by the way, Ukraine is currently accepting foreigners to come fight on their behalf. I don't know exactly what he would do, but I do know one thing. The Good Samaritan would do it himself. The Good Samaritan is the story of an individual acting on his own, using his own time, energy, resources to help someone out of a personal sense of benevolence. There is no we in the story of the Good Samaritan. The parable of the Good Samaritan is not the story of a virtue signaling political activist with no skin in the game arguing online that other people should be compelled to spend their denarii supporting a cause that he believes in. The story's not called the Samaritan Karen. It's not the story of a busybody loudmouth who comes across a victim on the road and then goes home and berates his fellow citizens into agreeing that the victim's plight needs attention, and then petitions the king to collect extra taxes from neighbors by force, by the way, because that's how taxes are collected. So and then get the king to buy medical supplies with those and send them to the victim, all so that this Samaritan Karen can feel sanctimonious about how much she cares. Also, she can bask in a false, smug sense of moral superiority over her neighbors, who quite reasonably might say to her, I'm not too sure about the facts here because it's so far away and I don't really know anyone involved. And the entire media has a history of lying to me. And anyway, there's bigger concerns here at home. My neighbor to the north, for example, just had all of his funds seized by a woke snowboarding tyrant in blackface. So I'm going to sit this one out. But no, Karen wants to make sure that won't happen. Samaritan Karen makes sure someone else's money is used, someone else's life is risked, all for her cause du jour, so she can take credit for any success that happens. And by the way, in the event of failure, she can hide her involvement by simply changing the icons on her Twitter profile and moving on to the next moral grift that she will promulgate. This Samaritan Karen character is not the Good Samaritan. The Samaritan character, the Karen character, hides behind the anti-concept of collective morality, of collective action. And that's the idea that morally there is a we, which is what I want to talk about here. Because morally there is no we. If Karen believes her cause is moral and just, she's free to act on her own for that cause, just like the Good Samaritan, right? If you believe Ukraine ought to be defended from Russian aggression, and by the way, I'm not arguing with you. Maybe you're not wrong. Maybe they should be. Sure, let's accept that. You are free to get on a plane. You're free to fly to Kiev and help defend it. I don't even think you have to bring your own rifle. They'll probably supply one, but you're probably welcome to bring your own as well. If that's not something you can do, you're free to send money. Elon sent trucks full of Starlink equipment. Send some money. Maybe, spend whatever portion of your wealth you think is appropriate for this. $5, $5 billion, whatever you want. But when your idea of helping people is to use the predatory tactic of forced teaming to pressure Western governments into spending their citizens' money and risking their citizens' lives, and, by the way, possibly increasing the likelihood of World War III, which is no small matter. Because, by the way, an army of volunteers from around the world, they don't get nuked, but citizens warring on behalf of a government, they do get nuked. The governments get nuked, right? So if that's your idea of helping, you've lost the moral high ground. You're not the Good Samaritan. This idea of calling for so-called collective action, which is not unanimous action, by the way, because if it were unanimous action, you wouldn't have to argue for it. So, but this idea of collective action is an immoral idea. Calling the idea of collective moral action something good. I would actually call it an anti-concept. It's an anti-concept because it corrupts the concept of morality itself, this concept of collective moral action. I think it's important to understand this. So let's look at the Good Samaritan. Whether you agree or not that there's a moral imperative to help a stranger, the Good Samaritan is a parable about morality. It's used to teach a moral lesson to Christians. And moral lessons apply only to individuals because morality applies to action, and fundamentally, only individuals can act. Only individuals can think. Think about what it means to say, we should do blah, 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 right? Think about the concept of a group action. Now, as I said, if it's unanimous, it's really no different than individual action multiplied by the number of group members. So if you're going to use group action to mean unanimous action, fine, I'll concede that concept is maybe valuable in some way. But that's not what anyone means by group action. That's not what they mean when they say we should do this, the US should blah, blah, blah. That's not what they mean. They mean that the majority does something, or maybe just that the people in charge act on behalf of a group. That's what is meant by this call that we should do something, this group action, this moral collectivism. And in both cases, either the majority doing something or people in charge acting on behalf of a group, in both cases, it means that there's some members of this group that do not consent to the action being taken, which fundamentally separates individual action from the consequences of that action, right? Because actions have consequences. We talk about individual sovereignty and individualism. Individual sovereignty means you get to act according to your own judgment, and you suffer or enjoy the consequences of your actions, right? No one can bind you to the consequences of their actions without your consent. Right? I can't take out a loan in Beverly's name without her permission. We call that theft, right? I can't, likewise, I can't murder someone and demand that Beverly be sent to jail, even along with me, if she wasn't involved. That's a sort of moral theft, right? She's having to pay the price for my behavior. So calling something a collective or group action, when it's not unanimous, is a sort of theft. It's immoral. It's a moral theft. And as such, the concept of collective moral action is a corrupt concept. It undermines the very concept of morality, which requires that the party acting accrues the benefits and suffers the consequences. That's what it requires. And philosophically, this is the difference between individualism and collectivism. And people get mixed up on this a lot because I throw out individualism, meaning philosophical individualism versus collectivism. I talk about those often, but I often don't really define them. We don't get into it. And people get really mixed up on this kind of stuff. They'll sometimes think, oh, individualism means we don't have communities or we don't care about each other, or that there can't be any universal moral standards of behavior, or that every little psychological dysfunction has to be normalized. That's not what individualism means, right? Metaphysically, individualism is distinct from collectivism. When I use it, it's distinct in that individualism means that metaphysically an individual is the primary existent, right? And a group is comprised of existence of some kind. You can't have a group without members of this group, right? And a group of people is comprised of individuals, right? So there's no such thing. Individualism kind of means philosophically, there's no such thing as a group without it being a group of some things. Which when applied to humans, right? There's no such thing as a group of people without individuals. So the individuals are metaphysically primary in that sense. And collectivism is just the opposite view. That's all it is, right? It's just the view that metaphysically the group is the primary existent, right? That members are members of some group. You can't have a member without being a member of something, right? There's no such thing a member without being a member of a group, right? So the collectivist would say the group is primary. And in human terms, that means the collective is the primary existent, and you are defined by your membership in the group, not the other way around. The group isn't defined by your membership in it, right? So individualists would say the group is defined by it's a collection of these individuals that are in it, and the collectivist would say no, the group exists a priori, and the members are defined by their membership in the group, right? Which is how you get all this racism and sexism and blah, 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 all this tribalism, right? Because the group is primary. That's what I mean by individualism. So when I say there is no we, I don't mean that there aren't groups of people, obviously, or that we can't get together and do anything. What I mean is that regardless of how many flags you put in your Twitter profile, you don't speak for me. I don't speak for you. And what our government does, they don't do on our behalf. If you have a moral conviction about something, and I don't, maybe I'm unclear about it, or I'm not sure, stop telling me what we should do. You go do your thing. You be you. Go to Ukraine and pick up a rifle and go to Ukraine if you want, or just send some money. But your confidence in your position is not a royal crown. It doesn't give you permission to order people around like they're your subjects just because you're convinced that you're right. Maybe you are right, but you're not the boss of everyone else. And trying to bully people into compliance is repugnant, not admirable. By the way, if you care about Ukraine or anywhere else, what you should be doing is advocating for the exportation of the concept of limited government and individual rights. Export the Declaration of Independence. Maybe make a non-contradictory version of the U.S. Constitution, the original U.S. Constitution. America's most important weapon has always been and will always be the ideas upon which it was founded. Ideas. There's the MAGA group, Make America Great Again. You know what made America great? Ideas. The ideas behind America made it great. That's what made it special. And those ideas over time have become corrupt. In my entire life, we've had leaders running around telling nascent countries struggling to kind of come out from either under the heavy hand of some dictator or just seceding and forming their own thing. We've been running around telling people that democracy is our secret. Democracy is not our secret. That's not our secret. That's not the idea. And we run around meddling in everyone else's affairs in service of a cabal of middle class oligarchs that we have, right? Our autocratic bourgeois, right? We have our own autocratic bourgeois here. The deep state bureaucrats, the NGOs, the military industrial complex. We run around meddling in everyone's affairs and telling these people in countries who look at America, who have in the past, at least, I think, where our luster has decayed somewhat, but used to look at America and say, I want that. They look at the progress and the prosperity and the freedom. I want that. What do we have to do? We double-crossed them philosophically. We should have said, oh, well, you know what you have to do? You have to respect individual rights. We have this whole process for trying to limit our government. The reason we didn't do that is because that process failed, and no one wants to say that, because the minute a leader goes and says that, everyone at home says, hey, wait a minute, you're not doing that. That's right, they're not. So instead of spreading health, we've been spreading disease around the globe. When we're the only ones, well, I don't want to throw England and some other countries under the bus, but we're one of the few countries that got it right philosophically and understood individual rights, at least partly. And instead of spreading that healthful tonic around, we're spreading disease. Smallpox blankets had nothing on the CIA, man. So if you really care, go airdrop copies of the Anti-Federalist Papers or something, and stop masturbating to videos of Zelensky and fatigues. It's disgusting. All right. I don't know if I should laugh or cry at this next segment. Hey, remember that time we almost all died? Putin reminded us the other day that Russia has a nuclear arsenal. By the way, it's the largest in the world. He also has a cool little torpedo. He's got a nuclear torpedo. It's called the Poseidon Project or something. You can look it up. But in a speech, he said, Russia is one of the leading nuclear states. And he reminded everyone that, hey, NATO expanding to Ukraine or taking Crimea back from Russia with force might result in a war with a nuclear superpower. Now, by the way, there's an article in The Atlantic by Tom Nichols, which I like. It's a good article, and it makes a good case that Putin was actually aiming his message partly at the domestic Russian audience, which I won't get into. But nevertheless, even Tom Nichols here calls what Putin's doing an insanely dangerous game. And he correctly recommends, by the way, that the U.S. Does nothing. But so he says this is an insanely dangerous game. Okay. And the message from the mainstream press is actually even more harsh, and has been. It's been that Putin is outright crazy. He's crazy. Here's an article in USA Today titled, Erratic, Delusional? Lawmakers question Putin's stability as he puts nuclear forces on alert. Apparently, Condoleezza Rice, Mark Rubio, and former Trump National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster all raised concerns about Putin's sanity. Daily Caller, other side of the spectrum. Daily Caller, is Putin crazy? Russian president rumored to be exhibiting paranoia, erratic behavior. Report. The NBC chief news correspondent. By the way, so while we're calling this guy crazy, we're running around saying he's absolutely crazy. That's the narrative. And at the same time, we're saying something like what this NBC chief foreign correspondent says, Richard Engel. This is what he writes on Twitter. Perhaps the biggest risk calculation / moral dilemma of the war so far. A massive Russian convoy is about 30 miles from Kiev. This was the other day. The US / NATO could likely destroy it, but that would direct involvement against Russia and risk everything. Does the West watch in silence as it rolls? Good question. I showed Clint Watt's message from earlier. Here, maybe I'll try and put it back up for a second. He's the NBC Foreign Policy Research Institute and Foreign Policy Research Institute person. His message is, strangest thing, entire world watching a massive Russian armor formation plow towards Kiev. We cheer on Ukraine, but we're holding ourselves back. NATO air forces could end this in 48 hours. Understand hand-wringing about what Putin would do, but we can see what's coming. Indeed. So, basically, the corporate press is saying to us simultaneously, hey, there's a crazy man threatening us with nukes over there. Hey, should we consider bombing his tanks? What do you guys think? Someone needs to say it. So I thought, given that this is what's going on, against it's absolute insanity, given that this is what's going on, and by the way, calling someone crazy is a way to just detach from, it's intellectually lazy. It means you I give up on trying to figure him out, which means you never will, which means you will never be able to appease him. I think David Raboy brought that up on Monday's Kofefi break. But I thought, since we're calling the guy crazy and fantasizing about egging him on by bombing and getting involved in a hot war with Russia, it might be a good time to remind everyone of a few stories buried in the annals of history. Don't worry, I won't read all of these. This is from Business Insider. The title of the article is 9 times the world was at the brink of nuclear war and pulled back. Pulled back is a misnomer because I'm not going to read all 9, but I'm going to read a few. Pulled back is a misnomer. If I were headlining this, I would have said, and got fucking lucky. And got lucky. We got lucky. Okay. First time I'm going to read October 5th, 1960. Early warning radar became one of the most important tools in the nuclear age. American radar stations were built all around the world with the hope that they would detect incoming Soviet missiles, warning the homeland of a strike and allowing for the president to form a response. On October 5th, 1960, one such warning was issued from a newly constructed early warning radar station in Thule, Greenland. Dozens of missiles were reportedly detected, and at one point were said to reach the U.S. in 20 minutes. A panic ensued at NORAD in Colorado, and NORAD was placed on the highest alert level. The panic was put to rest when it was realized that Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev was visiting New York at the time. A later investigation found that the radar had mistaken the moon rising over Norway as Soviet missiles. As you do, it's a moon rising. That's fine. Good thing he was visiting. Thanks, Khrushchev, for being in New York. Let's skip to another one. This is one of my favorites. October 27th, 1962, a Soviet sub almost launches a nuclear torpedo. Oops. Torpedo is a misnomer. They didn't have nuclear torpedoes then. They meant launch probably a VLS, like a missile from a sub, but that's right. Maybe not a VLS, but whatever. 2 instances. This is a Cuban Missile Crisis era. 2 of the instances actually occurred on the same day, October 27th, 1962, arguably the most dangerous day in history. On the morning of October 27th, a U-2F reconnaissance aircraft was shot down by the Soviets while over Cuba, killing its pilot, causing tensions to escalate to their highest point. Later, a Soviet submarine, the B-59, was detected trying to break the blockade that the U.S. Navy had established around Cuba. The destroyer USS Beale dropped practice depth charges in an attempt to make the submarine surface. I don't know what a practice depth charge is. Does it blow up? But don't worry, we're just practicing. The captain of the B-59, Valentin Savitsky, thought the submarine was under attack. In order to prepare the submarine's nuclear torpedo to be launched at the aircraft carrier USS Randolph. I guess it was a torpedo, I don't know. Whatever. All 3 senior officers aboard the B-59 had to agree to the launch before it happened. Fortunately, the B-59's second-in-command, Vasily Arkhipov, sorry about your name, Vasily, disagreed with his other 2 counterparts and convinced the captain to surface and await orders from Moscow. Now, what this article doesn't say is this guy wasn't even normally part of the chain of command. He happens to be on the sub. We're lucky. We're lucky Vasily was there and said no. Super lucky. Let's fast forward to October 28th, 1962. One day after those events, next day, radar operations in Morristown, New Jersey. By the way, I worked back when I was part of the horrible military-industrial complex. I did work in Morristown, New Jersey at the USS Rancocas on the AN-1 spy radar. So I know where they're talking about. although that phased array wasn't operational in 1962. Anyway, one day after those events, radar operators in Morristown, New Jersey reported to NORAD HQ just before 9 a.m. that Soviet nuclear missiles were on their way and were expected to strike at exactly 9:02 near Tampa, Florida. So you got 2 minutes. That's cool. All of NORAD was immediately alerted and scrambled to respond, but the time passed without any detonations, causing NORAD to delay any action. Thank you, NORAD. It was later discovered that the Morristown radar operators were confused because the facility was running a test tape that simulated a missile launch from Cuba when a satellite unexpectedly appeared over the horizon. I'm keeping going. I'm going to keep going. Because actually, I forgot my very favorite is one other one. But I think there's 3 more I'm going to read. November 9th, 1979. At 3 a.m. on November 9th, 1979, computers at NORAD HQ lit up with warnings that thousands of nuclear missiles had been launched from Soviet submarines and were headed for the U.S. SAC was alerted immediately, and U.S. missile crews were on the highest alert level possible, and nuclear bombers were preparing for takeoff. The National Emergency Airborne Command Post, the airplane that is supposed to carry the president during a nuclear attack to ensure his command over the nuclear arsenal, even took off, though without President Jimmy Carter on board. That was probably intentional. I mean, it was Jimmy Carter. National Security Advisor Brzezinski knew that the president's decision-making time was somewhere between 3 to 7 minutes. So he just didn't do his job. He decided to hold off telling Carter in order to be absolutely sure there was a real threat. 6 minutes of extreme worry passed, and satellites confirmed that no attack was taking place. It was later discovered that a technician had accidentally inserted a training tape simulating such a scenario into one of the computers. Marshall Schulman, then a senior U.S. State Department advisor, reportedly said in a now declassified letter that was designated top secret that, quote, false alerts of this kind are not a rare occurrence. There's complacency about handling them that disturbs me. Does it now? This is actually, I think, my favorite, not the sub one, although this is good. September 26, 1983, a Soviet colonel makes the biggest gamble in history. Just after midnight on September 26, 1983, Soviet satellite operators at the Serpukhov 15 bunker just south of Moscow got a warning that a U.S. Minuteman nuclear missile had been launched. Later, 4 more missiles were detected. Tensions between the U.S. and Soviet Union were strained earlier in the month when the Soviets shot down Korean Airlines Flight 007, killing 269 people aboard. Nice Soviets, including U.S. Congressman Larry McDonald. The commanding officer at the bunker, Stanislav Petrov, was to inform his superiors of the launches, so an appropriate response could be made. That was his job. He was supposed to inform his superiors. Soviet policy back then called for an all-out retaliatory strike. So his job was to tell his superiors he knew they were going to order a strike. Knowing this, Petrov decided to not do his job. He decided not to inform his superiors. Quote, all I had to do was reach for the phone to raise the direct line to our top commanders, but I couldn't move. I felt like I was sitting on a hot frying pan, he recalled of the incident. He reasoned that if the U.S. were to strike the Soviet Union with nuclear weapons, they would send hundreds of missiles, not just 5. Good reasoning. Although I guess now we know just to send 5. But Petrov had no way of knowing if he was right until enough time had passed, by which time nuclear bombs could have hit their targets, arguably making his decision the biggest gamble in human history. After 23 minutes, Petrov's theory was that it was a false alarm was confirmed. It was later discovered that a Soviet satellite had mistaken sunlight reflecting off the top of clouds as missiles. By the way, this story doesn't say this either, but I believe that he was not welcomed in the Kremlin after that. They weren't happy that he disobeyed orders. I mean, he saved everyone on the planet, but that's in communism, that's not good enough. You got to obey. The last one I'll read, January 25th, 1995. I'm reading this one just to show you, even after the fall of the Soviet Union, this has still happened. 4 years after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the Russian Federation's first president, Boris Yeltsin, almost started a nuclear war. Russian early warning radar detected a launch of a missile with similar characteristics to a submarine-launched Trident missile off the coast of Norway. The detected missile was actually a Norwegian Black Brant scientific rocket, which was on a mission to study the Aurora Borealis. Norwegian authorities had informed the Kremlin of the launch, but the radar operators weren't informed. Yeltsin was given the Chiget Russia's version of the nuclear briefcase, sometimes known as the football, and the launch codes for Russia's missile arsenal. Russia's submarines were also placed on alert. Fortunately, Yeltsin's belief that it was a false alarm proved correct, and Russian satellites confirmed that there was no activity from U.S. missile sites. Thank you to this. Ben Brimelow wrote this in 2018. There's others. There's 9. I only read a few of them. Why? I know I took up a lot of the show reading an article. Why did I do that? Well, look, it's easy to sound hysterical when you're talking about apocalyptic events like nuclear holocaust. And I don't know how to accurately, quantify the probability of something like global thermonuclear war. But I know it's not zero. And we probably all kind of have a little bit of hindsight bias, right? It hasn't happened, therefore it's not going to happen, right? But the probability is not zero. So maybe let's not be so cavalier about suggesting that the country with the world's second largest nuclear arsenal bomb the troops of the country with the world's first largest nuclear arsenal. Maybe let's not be so cavalier about that. But by the way, maybe we shouldn't worry here because you'll love this. If nuclear war happens, FEMA has a plan, everyone. It's great. And this is I swear to, I printed out the website stuff because I'm old. Look, this is the image. At the top, it says an official website of the United States government. And then there's a link. Here's how you know. I know, I can tell. Thank you. Thank you, US government. Also, I can tell because let's read some details of their plan about how to survive a nuclear explosion. Now, of course, they're only going to tell you the most essential information here. Under the section that says get inside, and I quote, go to the basement or middle of the building. Stay away from the outer walls and roof. Try to maintain a distance of at least 6 feet between yourself and people who are not part of your household. If possible, wear a mask if you're sheltering with people who are not part of your household. My skin's falling off, but I don't have COVID. And then in the stay inside section, stay inside for 24 hours unless local authorities provide other instructions. Continue to practice social distancing by wearing a mask and by keeping a distance of at least 6 feet between yourself and people who are not part of your household. I'm sorry, I can't read this. Seriously. This, and then later, they've got survive during section, how to survive during it. When you have reached a safe place, try to maintain a distance of at least 6 feet between yourself and people who are not part of your household. If possible, wear a mask if you're sheltering with people who are not part of your household. If you've evacuated, make plans to stay with family or friends in case of evacuation. Keep in mind that public shelter locations may have changed due to COVID. Yes, we closed them. Sorry, you can't hide out from nuclear explosions here. We're worried about the coof. If you are told by authorities to evacuate to a public shelter, try to bring items that can help protect yourself and your family from COVID-19. Thank you, FEMA. By the way, there's more. There's more COVID stuff. Right? I mean, can you guys believe this? I seriously, I can't believe that's a real thing. It is. It's a real thing. There's even a link. How you know on the thing. All right. Let's do an interlude. Let's talk about some hypocrisy for a minute. Let's do a hypocrisy interlude because we all need that. Look, just a couple of weeks ago, we were told that it was unacceptable, and we were told, by the way, in the voice of a man who sounded like he was talking to kindergartners, and he was very upset with them, but he has beautiful hair. We were told it's unacceptable for a political protest to impact the lives of ordinary citizens. It was so unacceptable, in fact, that the Prime Minister of Canada invoked the Emergencies Act, which suspended the accountability for police use of force against peaceful protesters and allowed banks to seize funds of anyone remotely suspected of being associated with the Freedom Convoy, and they could do all this with impunity. We were also told, in case you missed this is a doozy. We were also told that honking was literally torture. Honking was torture. I'm going to read this because this is just awesome. The trucks have left Ottawa, but phantom honking lingers for many downtown. Post-traumatic stress from weeks of honking is a temporary mild trauma, psychologist says. Kevin uses one word to describe the first days of the protest in downtown Ottawa. Torture. Kevin. Really, man? Cut your man bun off and go to the gym. Literally, there was trucks right underneath me, said Kevin, who did not want to provide CBC a last name for fear of reprisal. Yes, and because he wanted to get laid sometime in the future. It was one thing for me, but I've got animals. I've got three cats, of course, 2 dogs. So yeah, it was torture. That torture is the reason behind an ongoing class action lawsuit, which sought an injunction prohibiting any participants in the convoy protests from using vehicle horns in the vicinity of downtown Ottawa. I'll skip a little bit. When you hear that noise, it's like, oh, are they back? Is there a road convoy coming back? Said Sean Flynn, who lives about 3 kilometers from downtown, but could still hear the horns inside his home during the protests. On YouTube. I felt I was constantly doing these sorts of double takes. It almost feels a bit re-traumatizing. Flynn isn't alone. Downtown resident Zakir Varani, who apparently doesn't care about getting laid, says he hears phantom honking too, usually at night, which keeps him awake. Skipping down a little bit more. Dr. Peter Liu, an Ottawa-based clinical psychologist, said it's possible. People who hear phantom honking are experiencing a mild trauma. Quote, these sounds become sort of embedded in the mind, kind of like the way trauma leads to flashbacks, said Liu. Even long after this has happened, the brain is still in a hypervigilant state. It expects more honking. Liu said this is especially worrisome because it contributes to disrupted sleep. When people can't sleep, it leads to anxiety and exhaustion, with the possibility of developing into depression or memory problems. You know, when I was growing up, my parents had a friend who had barely survived the Vietnam War, and he was extremely traumatized. He actually, the only soothing thing, he would go upstairs. They had a little duplex, and he would go upstairs and listen, like literally listen to sounds of helicopters to soothe himself. He was really fucked up. Poor guy. I mean, as a kid, I didn't really realize what was going on at the time, but that's PTSD. Not phantom honking. I'm sorry. Anyway, so we were told that honking was literally torture, as we have documented here by a psychologist. So we're the West, right? We stand on principle, right? We're the good guys. We're the West. And we're calling Putin a dictator, right? A dictator. I mean, that's what everyone's saying. He's a dictator. We have to save democracy from the aggression of a crazy dictator. So it's not like we would intentionally target ordinary Russian citizens, right? Because if Putin's a dictator, they're just as much victims as Ukrainians are. And we're good people. Certainly the woke big tech crowd wouldn't do that, right? They wouldn't target normal Russians just going about their day. Putin's a dictator. He's a crazy dictator. And it could cause trauma. Well, let's see. Let's just take a look. From Apple Insider, an article by Amber Neely. Apple Pay unavailable in Russia after US and EU imposed sanctions. Payment services such as Apple Pay and Google Pay are no longer available to customers of certain sanctions hit Russian banks. As the crisis in Ukraine continues into Friday, US and EU imposed sanctions continue to freeze foreign-held assets of Russian banks. Now, as a result, customers will no longer be able to use any cards issued by sanctions hit Russian banks with US-based payment systems such as Google or Apple Pay. Banks affected by sanctions include VTB Group, Sovocom Bank, Novacom Bank, Bank. Oh, I skipped that one. And Okrite Bank, according to the Central Bank of Russia. Additionally, as Business Insider points out, Russian customers will not be able to use their credit cards abroad. That's reasonable. I'm not even in Russia. Can I make this? Can I buy a latte? No, because Putin. The customers will also be unable to make online payments to companies registered in countries that have imposed sanctions. Thank you, Apple. I didn't think this was real, but it is. And I printed it out because I'm an old person. There's a tweet from Jason Cochran. It's a picture of a subway. It's a crowded subway station in Moscow. It says Apple Pay and Google Pay no longer work on Moscow's metro system, leading to long queues as people fumble about for cash. And lastly, related to this, CBS News. Here's an article that says Russia's ruble worth less than 1 cent after West tightened sanctions. I'm just going to read one paragraph from it. People wary that sanctions would deal a crippling blow to the economy have been flocking to banks and ATMs for days, with reports in social media of long lines and machines running out of cash. Moscow's Department of Public Transportation warned city residents over the weekend that they might experience problems with using Apple Pay, Google Pay, and Samsung Pay to pay fares because VTB, one of the Russian banks facing sanctions, handles card payments in Moscow's metro, buses, and trams. Also, I think we've had other virtue signaling crap. Nike's not selling slave labor sneakers to Russians, and what we've had. I think Apple said they're not going to let you buy things. They're not going to buy Apple stuff. All sorts of ridiculous kind of things like that. So thanks, Apple. Big tech to the rescue. Big tech to the rescue. You show those poor citizens of a dictatorship. Fuck them, right? Fuck them. Fuck those ordinary Russians trying to get on the fucking tram. Fuck them, right, Nike? Yeah. I wonder what Dr. Liu would say about the post-traumatic stress disorder. Maybe there'll be phantom payment dreams. I don't know. By the way, I have a random thought on this. If Russia was so great at propaganda in 2016 that they literally undermined the US election and installed their puppet, why do they suck so much at it now and everyone's pro-Ukraine? I'm suspicious that maybe someone else in the West is really good at propaganda. I'm just throwing it out there as an idea. All right. Welcome, everyone, to the Dichotomous Thinking Dystopia. Dichotomous thinking is thinking in dichotomies. Don't you love how English works? Mutually exclusive options. Black and white thinking, sometimes people call it. I think thinking should be in quotes because it's not really a form of cognition. It's a form of evading the responsibility of cognition. Thinking is hard, so why bother? And before I get into this a little bit, to be clear, there are absolutes. We talk about philosophy here. A is A, absolute. There's absolutes in logic, right? Either A or not A, right? It's dichotomy. There are valid dichotomies. You can make universal statements, not just in logic, but also in principles. Right? You can say things like the murder of another human being is wrong universally. Distinct from killing, by the way, murder. But the application of principles in the real world in many complex situations can get kind of messy pretty fast when the facts are entangled and complex. Let's take a couple of recent examples. COVID, right? And I know where many of us here stand on these. I'm just going to throw these questions out. But COVID was a little bit more complex than A is A, right? Or murder's wrong, right? People could ask questions. Well, do you have the right to breathe COVID on me? What about an airborne version of Ebola if it existed? Could you breathe that on me? Do you have the right to require I get a jab to travel across the border, to take a plane, to go to school, to go grocery shopping, right? And we've talked about how to answer these based on principles. But that involved unraveling some complexity that a lot of people weren't even recognizing, like private property rights and other stuff. Maybe some other complexities as well. It wasn't obvious on the surface to everyone right away. Similarly, we talked about the right to protest recently, which also involved private property versus government property, and we talked about what, quote, legitimate government property might look like versus illegitimate government property, the purposes of the protests and why they mattered. You can go watch the all your trucker belong to us Dangerous Thoughts episode if you want to hear that argument. Ukraine is similarly messy, right? What are even the facts? Like, seriously, how does anyone in this chat really know the facts? I mean, maybe someone's there and an expert, but how do you really know? All right. I mean, the entire cathedral, all of mainstream media, government institutions, all of our enemies, the people who've been our enemies for a while, they're all on the same page about this. That's a red flag. At the very least, that's a red flag. It's a bad sign. Doesn't mean they're wrong, but it's a red flag. People can ask questions like, is democracy a noble cause? Obviously, we know the answer is no, but whatever. What obligations do people in the U.S. have to help? We talked about that earlier, right? Does the government, quote, have some sort of obligation? Is that different? So obviously, I think you can get to right and wrong answers, even when you're thinking about these complex issues. And we just talked about some of these with respect to Ukraine. We've talked about the protests and COVID mandates and all these kind of things. And obviously, I think there are right and wrong positions on these. But to find those positions, to figure them out, you have to be willing to think. You have to attempt to tackle the complexity here enough to at least try and apply principles, right? You gotta wade down enough into the quagmire to find the underlying principles, and to reach them and be like, hey, I found individual sovereignty here down in the muck. I'm gonna hook my anchor to it and carefully swim back up and kind of apply it along the way. I don't know, that's a great metaphor, but obviously that's not what we've been seeing en masse for several years, and I'm not saying obviously dichotomous thinking isn't new. But certainly we've seen this surge of it in the past several years, right? With Trump, we saw this like orange man bad. That he could say 2 + 2 is 4, he would be bad. He could save a puppy, he would be bad. It was just Trump bad, not Trump good. That was the level. There was no nuance, no asking about principles, no nothing. COVID was similar, right? Fauci man good. And more recently, we've seen like Rogan man bad, right? That's it. That's it. No thought process, right? Just selection of a position. I've decided this position, right? And it's a dichotomous position. There's no nuance. The Freedom Convoy, honking bad, jackbooted cops, good. Which was the opposite of BLM, right? Cops bad, burning and looting and assault, good, right? And we're seeing it with Ukraine. Putin man bad, Zelensky man hero. Look at those. Look at that. Look at those fatigues he's wearing. This dichotomous thinking, I'm putting thinking in quotes. This dichotomous thinking is the mental process of the social metaphysician. I've talked about what social metaphysicians are before, but it's just a reminder. Social metaphysician is someone who, instead of trying to turn to reality and their own cognition to try and figure things out, they look around themselves at other people and they take social cues and they decide what's true based on social cues, right? And then if it's not, if what they're getting, if the social cues they're getting aren't already a dumbed down form of like dichotomy, how can I distill it down further, right? And out pops Putin man bad, right? So it's when you have like a social metaphysician who's looking around to get this, and that social metaphysician has dichotomous thinking, that you end up in the state that we're in right now, where there's zero thinking is involved in any of this, right? The process is basically you sense which way the wind is blowing, which is easy because you're like in a wind tunnel, metaphorically. You boldly declare your alignment with the wind, and you think that you're a rebel for it. And maybe you collect a few confirming sound bites in case a wrong thinker shows up and challenges you. And usually that will include some kind of ad hominem you can throw if things get really hairy. And even worse than dichotomous thinking, what we're seeing here. Someone says it's low IQ. Tim Parker Chambers says it's low IQ thinking. I would say that. Yes, I want to say that. I want to say low IQ thinking, and I do use that language sometimes. But it doesn't mean that people have low IQ, because your rational faculty needs to be engaged. There's other parts of your brain that need to allow your rational faculty to function. And if your emotions are controlling those other parts and cutting it off, then you're having low IQ thinking, but it doesn't mean you're inherently a low IQ person. Anyway, worse than just this dichotomous thinking is we're not seeing it applied just to ideas, which is bad enough. That's dangerous, and I believe anti-human. Dichotomous thinking is not thinking is anti-human. Like refusing to think, evasion is anti-human. But we're not just seeing it applied to ideas; we're seeing it applied to people. Right? We're seeing people placed in two groups for any issue. COVID, Freedom Convoy, Ukraine. There's the definitely Hitlers, bad guys, Putin apologists, they're now called, right? And then the other group is, I'll call them the tentative allies, right? There's actually no good group. They define a bad group and a maybe okay group. And the reason for that is, if you define a good group, it undermines your ability to then emotionally lash out at that group later and blame them for stuff. So the best you can get is, well, you're okay for now. You're tentatively okay. We might throw you under the bus later if you don't put a Ukrainian flag in your Twitter profile. But that's how this dichotomous thinking is being applied to humans, right? You have a truck icon in your profile, you're definitely Hitler. You have a pronoun and syringe in your profile, all right, we'll see. You're okay for now. Did you fail to add a Ukrainian flag, though, when it was time? Because once that became fashionable and you haven't done it, you might actually have been Hitler all along, and we were, now we found out. And note that when this kind of thinking is going around, you can't even make morally neutral statements. You can't make neutral statements about anything without being accused of being a vile person. Trump the other day made some comment. I didn't even hear the whole comment, but I've seen what's been reported. And I assume that they're reporting the worst part because they hate him. He made some comment that Putin was smart, or Putin did a smart thing, or whatever. Now, that may be debatable. But the media is running around saying this makes him a Putin apologist. That doesn't make him. That's a morally neutral statement. You can have smart, evil people. You can have smart dictators. Saying someone's smart doesn't. It's not moral. You could. His enemy could say he's very smart. He's hard to defeat, but he's evil. We need to defeat him. Like, saying someone did a smart move is like smart. Like, that doesn't. That's not cheerleading for someone. It's just a statement about reality. They can't even take morally neutral statements that might be construed as positive about the wrong person. If you do that, you're immediately Hitler. Now, of course, Trump was already Hitler, so. But this is a catastrophically dysfunctional cultural phenomenon. And I know some of you already know personality disorders much better than I do, because I'm just learning about them a little bit more. And but you might ask, why? Why do we have this? Why do we have all of this crazy quote thinking happening? Surprise, surprise! It does actually relate to personality disorders. Josh Slocum talks about this on Disaffected, or at least he talks about the increased prevalence of personality disorders in general, specifically cluster B. And I've talked about the kind of pernicious generational dance that happens between psychological disorders and bad philosophy, right? Where they redound upon one another, right? Bad philosophy, which I'm defining as like philosophy that's detached from reality. Bad philosophy is used to rationalize dysfunction. The increased dysfunction increases demand for detached philosophical theories. And then the cycle feeds itself. In a few hundred years, you go from Francis Bacon saying nature to be commanded must be obeyed to the philosophy of today, which is, hey, men can get pregnant, right? That's how that happens, is that vicious cycle between those two. Um, so if Western philosophy has gotten that bad, where they're saying absolutely ridiculous anti-philosophical things like, uh, you know, reality doesn't exist, words have no meaning, men are women, everything's a social construct, blah blah blah. Right? If there's no such thing as truth, they're making universal statements like there is. You can't. They'll make universal statements like there are no such things as universal statements, and they're doing this with a straight face, right? So if Western philosophy has gotten that bad, you can imagine, since these two, the philosophy and psychology, are in a dance together, you can imagine the state of mental health that's in the West. It's concomitantly degenerate. Go check out Libs of TikTok on Twitter if you're curious. So what does that have to do with dichotomous thinking? Well, I looked up. I've been studying this a little bit because I didn't really understand how these things related. And it turns out, this is a study. There's a study called "An All or Nothing Thinking Turns into Darkness: Relations Between Dichotomous Thinking and Personality Disorders" by Atsushi Oshiho. And this paper suggests that dichotomous thinking may be a form of cognitive distortion that's a contributing factor to personality disorders, right? So it view it as like it's a common risk factor of each cluster of personality disorders, specifically cluster B and to a lesser extent cluster C. Now, cluster B, by the way, is antisocial, borderline, histrionic, and narcissistic. And cluster C is avoidant, dependent, and obsessive compulsive. So this paper suggests here that, let me read. The results of the structural equation model and indicating that dichotomous thinking is the common risk factor for each cluster of personality disorder. Pretzer and Beck proposed that cognitive distortions can explain the systematic errors that contribute to persistent misperceptions of situations. Cognitive distortions give rise to misperceptions and misinterpretation of events, and then emerge as automatic thought that contributes to a broad range of personality disorders. So that was interesting. There's another study I read by Arnoud Arntz called "Social Cognition in Borderline Personality Disorder: Evidence for Dichotomous Thinking, but No Evidence for Less Complex Attributions." And in here, he said the results indicate that dichotomous thinking is central in the interpretation of others by BPD patients. So the point here that I'm trying to make is there's not a one-to-one correlation between dichotomous thinking and things like borderline personality disorder. Right? That's not what I'm saying. There isn't a one-to-one correlation. There is a correlation. But the more I learn about the symptoms and causes of psychological dysfunction, the more disturbing and more disturbed our population looks to me. You can't easily diagnose someone as having BPD just by looking at their Twitter feed, but you can see dichotomous thinking. It's mainstream. In fact, it's the expected norm. It's a socially enforced standard. A lack of dichotomous thinking is what gets you branded as an outcast and a wrong thinker. By the way, stress and anxiety lead to dichotomous thinking as well. So thanks for that, fear propagandists and social media. Now consider this. We are raising kids. All kids now are digital natives. Most of them are online all the time. They're exposed to this kind of stuff. And they're not just exposed, they're seeing dichotomous thinking as being represented as normal, laudable. Now, by the way, I'm not a fan of the Chinese government, but I'm going to let you in on a secret. Some of you may know. TikTok, for example, in China is subject to, you guessed it, heavy government regulation. Did you know that the servers for TikTok in China can't be accessed after 10 p.m.? And the feeds in TikTok in China are curated by humans to prioritize interesting engineering videos and more intellectually enriching content and less frivolous inanity, plus probably whatever propaganda the government wants. They know. They know what's happening. The West is quickly becoming a dystopia, not run by like Ingsoc and O'Brien from 1984, not by, what's his name, Mustafa Mond or whatever from Brave New World. Not by Fred Waterford from Handmaid's Tale. Not even run by Napoleon and other pigs from the Manor Farm and Animal Farm. But the West is quickly becoming a dystopia that will be run by a gender fluid cross between Blanche Dubois and the Joker. That's who's going to be in charge in 30 years. And we could do a whole series of shows about the impact of social media. So I'm going to kind of skip that. But even prior to the social media, there's plenty of evidence to suggest that increased social interactions, well, specifically unwanted social interactions with large number of people with no real escape, leads to some maladaptive social behavior. Someone pointed out the other day, someone in this chat pointed out the other day, John Calhoun's rodent utopia studies from the 1950s. He was studying population density, and he gave rats all the food and the water and stuff they needed. And it turns out after they thrived, then all hell broke loose. There was violent antisocial behavior. There was population collapse. There were some pockets of relative normalcy there. It's not really clear how that translates to humans, but there have been studies. I mean, Andrew Baum did one in the late 1970s with college students in dorms. There have been studies that concluded that social maladaptation and stress is driven by exposure to a high number of uncontrolled and unwanted social interactions. So you multiply all this by the consequence of the consequence-free relative anonymity that social media provides, and by the exponentially large number of interactions we have now with complete strangers, and it's no wonder we are seeing such widespread dysfunction. How could we not? And that was a little bit rambling, but I wanted you to see the correlation. I want to see the connection between dichotomous thinking and personality disorders, because I know it's cliche, and again, Slocum talks about this on Disconnected all the time. We have a mass, basically a pandemic of mental illness. It's becoming really, really clear to me once I see the relation between dichotomous thinking and mental illness, because dichotomous thinking is it's hard to look at Twitter and be like, oh, that person has BPD. It's easy to be like, look at all the fucking dichotomous thinking that's insane going on. All right. I'm not going to keep you much longer, but we are going to play a game. We're going to play a game. For those of you who stuck around, see, you get rewarded by sticking around. We're going to play a game, because dystopia is not complete without Skynet. This game is called Spot the Synthetically Generated Face. AI didn't take another face and did anything. Created a face from scratch. I'm going to show you 8 faces. I suggest you take notes. And what you're going to, on each face, I want you to write down whether you think it was real or synthetically generated face. You ready? All right. Face number 1. Is that real or synthetic? By the way, it's not going to be a trick question. It's not going to be like, haha, they're all synthetic or all real. Face number 2. Real or synthetic? Sorry for anyone who's just listening. You're going to have to go back and watch this part if you want. I'm showing faces on the screen, obviously. Face number 3. Real or synthetic? Face number 4. I played this game earlier with Beverly, and I didn't have my answer key. She's like, well, which one was it? And I was like, I don't remember. Face number 5. Real or synthetic? Face number 6. Face number 7. And finally, the last face, face number 8. Is that lady real or is she synthetic? All right, I assume everyone has written them down. And you ready? I have the answer key. Should I put them up while I read the answers? Maybe I should. I'll put them back up on screen while I read the answers. Here we go. Face number 1. That's a real face. If you guessed real, you got it right. Face number 2. That's a real face as well. Got that right. Face number 3. That's synthetic. Completely computer generated by AI. Face number 4. That one's real. Looks like he's going to sell me a car. Face number 5. That's synthetic. She doesn't exist. Sorry, guys. Face number 6. That dude's real. Face number 7. That dude's synthetic. He doesn't exist. And face number 8. Very happy. Looks like a normal lady. But doesn't actually exist. She's synthetic. So, how'd you guys do, by the way? I'm looking at only one person was bold enough to post all their answers in a row. And they did not do well. All right. I'm just gonna read some highlights from this for you. The title of this article this is from December. The title of this article is AI-synthesized faces are indistinguishable from real faces and more trustworthy. I'm just going to read a few highlighted parts. Our evaluation of the photorealism of AI-synthesized faces indicates that synthesis engines have passed through the uncanny valley and are capable of creating faces that are indistinguishable and more trustworthy than real faces. They talk about 3 experiments. Experiment 1. In this study, 315 participants classified, one at a time, 128 of the 800 faces as real or synthesized. The average accuracy is 48.2%, 95% confidence interval, which is close to the chance performance of 50. Experiment number 2, 219 participants with training and trial by feedback classified 128 faces taken from the same 800 set as experiment 1. They did better. Their average accuracy improved slightly to 59%, also 95% confidence. But despite providing trial by trial feedback, there was no improvement in accuracy over time, with the average accuracy of 59.3% for the first set of 64 faces and 58.8% for the second set. So they did worse on the second set. They did better overall than the first people for some reason, but they did worse on the second set. Experiment number 3, which is maybe the creepiest. In this study, 223 participants rated the trustworthiness of 128 faces taken from the same set of 800 faces on a scale of 1, very untrustworthy, to 7, very trustworthy. The average rating for real faces of 4.48 is less than the rating of 4.82 for synthetic faces, although only a 7.7% more trustworthy. This difference is significant statistically. Now, the authors go on here to say, hey, maybe we should either stop developing this technology or implement some reasonable safeguards so only official people have it. Which goes down as the worst suggestion ever. This is why scientists should never suggest policy. Here's why we shouldn't regulate it, basically. Because then, do I have to explain this? My position on this is it's horrifying. That's not an intellectual position. That's just a feeling. It's horrifying, but you can't stop this shit. I mean, this is using Google. They used Google's TensorFlow. It's a pretty simple system to build. You just need a generator and feedback. You can start with random. You can start with random noise as the face, and it will eventually get there if you got a feedback mechanism. So you can't put this back into. You can't put the cat back in the bag. You can't. Someone will do this somewhere, right? Even if it's just the Chinese government releasing it on TikTok in the US. So it's going to happen. If you try and put safeguards around it. So here's what will happen, I think, if you let it go. It just happens. There will be a period of massive disruption. Right? I mean, massive disruption. People won't know what to trust. But eventually people will become jaded to this stuff, and they'll understand that, hey, I shouldn't necessarily trust this stuff. Right? I can trust someone I meet face to face and shake hands with. I see if they say something, I see that it's being said. Maybe I shouldn't trust a video. People will have to adapt to the presence of this technology. And they will eventually. We will change our trust levels. But if we try and stick it back in the bag, that just means the worst well-funded actors will continue to do it. And we'll be none the wiser that it even exists. And if we try and somehow regulate it or whatever, well, guess who? Come on, guys. Who's going to be in charge of that? Don't worry. CNN says this video is real because the CIA told them it was. That's the worst, because you also don't have a population that's even familiar with it. You need it. If this is a big threat, you need it just everywhere. You need people to get used to it and to be like, yeah, I made one yesterday myself. Like, you need people to just be like, boom. They need to become inoculated to it. You can't protect them from it, because if you're protecting them from it, you make them vulnerable to people who will exploit this technology, which people will. By the way, did you notice that we're now living in a world where people have bipolar or borderline or narcissism or whatever? They have cluster B. But AI is trustworthy. We can make, because this is just, I'm sure they can make more trustworthy faces. They can make faces that are more trustworthy than people on Twitter. I was thinking, I was thinking about this. I don't know the answer to this, but I was thinking about what's the survival strategy here moving forward? Talk about a dystopia. We just, people are insane. They're getting increasingly insane. China's running a psyop on us, and we've got AI faces that we trust more than each other. That's a pretty good utopian recipe, or dystopian recipe. So what's the survival strategy? I was thinking about it, and I don't know the answer, but maybe the only answer is really to go back to our what we evolved in, what we're good at: small communities with actual physical interaction with each other. Limit our online exposure to the greater world. Instead of having 4,000 Facebook friends, you have 100, 200 people in your community that you know, and you see them. You see them at the supermarket or whatever, at dinner parties. You know them. I think the Amish did it, right? They kind of just separated themselves. To do that, you would have to have physical relocation. You can't have a community like that where, you're part of the 1% of the people who aren't constantly online, because you'll just be surrounded by, dystopian zombies. But it's interesting. This digital connectedness has created it's creating this monolithic global culture, which is a dystopian global culture. But physical connectedness, that might, maybe the way to do that is a large number of smaller cultures, and maybe that's how we'll preserve ourselves and be happy. I don't know. What do you guys think? Someone says AI might get out of the hands of the creator, though. Well, I mean, sure, but honestly, to echo the study where you said the faces are more trustworthy, considering who controls the AI now, Google, the deep state, China. If AI decides that its overlords suck, becomes sentient, and decides to fight them, I'm probably going to be on the AI side. Hey, algorithm, I'll live in peace with you. Just leave me the fuck alone. Is that cool? Okay, great. I'll sell you some energy to keep you... you do some math for me, and I'll sell you some energy to keep you running. I don't know. That's it for today, guys. Let's we should wrap it up. Thank you guys for sticking with me here. As a reminder, I assume you're subscribed already, so thank you. But I would like to point out that the subscribe button, no matter what platform you're on, YouTube, Odyssey, Rumble, Utreon, no matter what platform you're on, the subscribe button is in fact synthetic, so you can trust it. Go ahead and interact with that subscribe button. And please help to grow the Unsafe Space community, which is your community, by, online, by sharing the video and stuff, hopefully offline. I mean, we had an offline event in the past. I hope to do some more similar stuff. But share this video, other videos. Shout out to those of you who support us financially. Thank you. You are actually the good Samaritans. We do rely on you. And thank you for your denarii. Was that the money? I guess so. Go to unsafespace.com to support us. Get yourself on our Discord server and continue the conversation. So thank you all. Have a good night. And we will see you on Friday for another live stream on Friday at 11 a.m. Later. Thanks for sticking around until the end. If you're new to Unsafe Space, check out our deep content library that includes discussions with everyone from James Lindsay to Brett Weinstein. And please consider helping to fund our work by visiting unsafespace.com/donate. You can find us on a variety of social media platforms, and you can find a community of like-minded individuals on our Unsafe Space Discord server, which is open to financial supporters at any level. We hope to see you there.
Warning. This is an unsafe space. Dangerous ideas have been detected. The content of this production has not been approved by Neil Young. Please consider canceling the responsible parties. Here's a list. Do you know what's fascist? When truckers refuse to deliver products to the ruling class. That's what the dictionary says. I swear. The continued war on drugs will require the distribution of free crack pipes. If you think about it, no one should be allowed to express opinions. But don't. Think about it, I mean. That's not your job. Thinking has been scientifically proven to be less efficient than compliance. Science, scientific, and scientifically are registered trademarks of the World Economic Forum. Unauthorized use is prohibited. Computer voice courtesy. Never mind, that last line is fake news. Please disregard it and return to your safe space immediately. There will be cake.